So welcome everyone. We are very glad that you are with us. This is an annual event and we're happy to be presenting and sharing with you the child and family outcomes data highlights for this year. I'm Kathy Hebler. I am one of the co-directors of the DaSy Center, and I am also part of ECTA. And Siobhan Colgan is with me too, and I'm going to do the child outcomes data. And Siobhan is going to cover the family data as the second part. And our structure today is exactly that. So we're going to do the first half on child outcomes, and we're going to do the second half on family outcomes. Okay, we're going to talk, I think I mentioned, what we're going to do is share with you the latest findings. We're going to talk to you about how we calculate the findings. And then we're going to talk to you about how to find resources to support state and local child and family outcomes data use. Child outcomes. Little bit of general background as to why we do this. I'm sure many of you know this, but this is the notion that compliance is never going to be enough anymore. We know compliance alone, looking at compliance, cannot produce good results. So the focus shifted, and it shifted many years ago, and continuing to cross that this focus is about looking at results. So all of the federal agencies, in case you don't know this, are required to report on outcomes achieved by their program. The Office of Special Ed uses child outcome data in multiple ways. I'm sure the Part C programs know about the results-driven accountability uses. And you may or may not know that OSEP uses it for Part C and Part B preschool funding justifications. You can actually find this in some of the budget justifications, the reporting of the data. The three child outcomes. In 2005, and this is how far this goes back, before 2005 there was no outcomes reporting. And so in 2005, OSEP required states to report data on three child outcomes. This is something that we have shown for years. This is a developmental trajectories of the A, B, C, D, E reporting categories that it sounds like most people are familiar with. So we're not going to talk too much about it, except that these are the reporting categories. They add up to 100%. All the states report on all the children who have been in for at least 6 months and who exit within that reporting year. Most of the data we're going to be talking about today are in the form of the two summary statements. And the important thing to know about the summary statements is that they're two different summary statements, and we refer to them in the shorthand of number one being children who substantially increase their rate of growth, and number two being children who exited functioning within age expectations. Everyone is always curious about how states get their child outcomes data. There are different reporting methods. For many, many years, the child outcomes summary process has been and continues to be the most common method used by states. But as you can see on the slide, there are a lot of different methods that states are using, and there's movement. Almost every year there's movement with a state deciding to go from one of these lines to one of the other lines. So this is the movement, as well as where states are or were for the 17-18 year in reporting in how they got their child outcomes data. I'm not going to go too much into the details of how we calculate the national estimate, but there are a couple things that I want to comment about it. First of all, when we talk about the national data, what we have is a weighted average. And why we have a weighted average is that, unlike child count, where we can just literally add up the number of children from each state to get a national number, here we have a percent from each state. And if we were to just average out the percents, that would mean that each state would weight evenly and equally. And so if you think of it with a two-state example, if we were to average a big state and a little state, those two states carry exactly the same weight in the average. So what we do is weight the data by the state percent so that the bigger states carry, every state carries the amount of, they carry weight equal to their child count. So the bigger states influence the national child outcomes average more than do the little states. And we do not include all of the states. And just to give you a little history on kind of why that is that when we were first asked many years ago, and I'm going to show you the data on the very next slide, to compute a national average, it was so early in the process that a lot of states had data that really should not go into the national average because it wasn't trustworthy. So what we did was set some very low bar criteria for quality so we could at least have some states to get into the national average. We have not changed that bar. And this is what the bar is in terms of who we include. We also do not include states who sample because we can't look at missing data for those states. All this is, and why I'm saying all this is, all of this is to say that if in fact you are looking at your data for quality, be advised this is a very low bar for quality. So we take a lot of states into the national average because states quality is not such an issue in computing this kind of, because there are so many states. So and we are using, and I'm going to go ahead right now to the next slide. This is how many states we're including in the national average, the national estimate right now. So we've got 45 Part B states and 48 Part C states. That is pretty much everybody. So we are very comfortable that this is a secure national estimate for child outcomes. That is not to say that if your state is included, it is because the bar is so low, it may not be sufficiently high quality for your state for decision making within your state. And hopefully you're using or about to start using your child outcomes data. So there are many ways to look at quality, and this is not the only way. It's good enough for the national estimate, but not good enough necessarily for within state decision making. These are the national numbers for 17-18. A couple things to call your attention to with the national numbers. One is that the social relationships number for Part C is in fact somewhat lower for summary statement 1 than it is for summary statement 2, where they're a little more in line with each other, although knowledge and skills is the low one for summary statement 2, as it is for Part B for summary statement 2. And what I'm going to show you is you can see that this trend has been going on for many, many years. We're only showing you this year's data plus the previous 6 years data. And by the way, all of these graphs I'm giving you the national data, but all of these are questions you can ask and look at with your within state data too. And then, and I'm going to get to the data quality profiles, you can actually compare your trends to the national trends. The trend data is, I would say, relatively stable. Certainly the relative placement of the numbers across the 3 outcomes is fairly stable. And the notion that the ordering has remained stable. We have seen the numbers dipping slightly for the knowledge and skills for Part C over the years, but it's not a huge difference. None of these are moving very much. They are moving a little bit. Let's look at the Part B data, the 619 data. You can see the summary statement 1 data across the outcomes is so clustered on top of one another, you can barely tell them apart. which is telling in and of itself. But they were all at 80% in 2012, and now we're hanging at 81, 82 for 2017. We see differences across the outcomes for summary statement 2 for the preschool data. But again, the stability across the years is certainly noteworthy. I just want to give you, going back to the data quality issue, give you some sense of state variation, which we have also had for many, many years. Just 67 is where we are right here. The inclusion criteria is the state had to be 28% or higher. I think that the only 2 bars that don't meet that criteria are the first 2, but you can also see at 119, and this is the total number of children with outcomes data divided by the total number of Part C exiters. Impossible. So again, we know we still have some data quality issues, certainly with completeness of the data. This is the preschool data. Again, we've got some serious outliers. The inclusion criteria here, because it is divided by the child count, not by the exiters, so the inclusion criteria is higher. But again, almost every state meets that inclusion criteria. And they're certainly the better thing for states, and states can compute this. We do not have access to this data, but to really look at how many children, what was the true number of children who stayed in the program who were in the program more than 6 months. If you have a true number of exiters rather than this proxy we need to use within your state, use your true number and look at your data quality that way. Real quickly, given our time, I'm just going to give you again, we've got this sense of national variation, which we have had and continue to have. Here's this, and I've just picked one for Part C and one for Part B. Part C here is exited within age expectations. That's summary statement 2. For outcome B, knowledge and skills. Here's where the national estimate comes in, the blue line. And here's the range. So you can see we have a lot of state variation. I could show you any of the summary statements, any of the outcomes, you get pretty much the same graph. Similarly, for 619, it's the same summary statement 2, outcome B, but again, the same pattern, lots of variation. It does sort of cluster around the national estimate, but we've got some states that are really low and a few that are really high. Now, I want to just show you one more analysis, and that is something we've looked at for a couple of years, and that's relating summary statement 2, children who exit within age expectation, to the percent served. So, and why do we do this analysis? What we know is that there's a lot of state variation in percent served. For example, state 1 serves a higher percent served than state 2. So the question is, who are these extra kids that state 1 is serving? Well, we know we have differences in eligibility criteria with Part C as well as in percent served. But we have always assumed that when a state is serving more children, those extra children are children with milder delays and milder disabilities, who would be the children most likely to exit within age expectations. So that's why we run this analysis. So the prediction here, the hypothesis is the higher the percent served, the more likely the state is to have higher numbers of children exiting within age expectation. What happens? For Part C, we see the pattern for social relationships is exactly what we predict. So the green bar are states serving under 2.5%. The blue bar are a middle range of states. The red bar, the states serving more than 3.9. And you see it for social relationships, you see it for knowledge and skills. It gets a little messed up on that mid-range of states for Part C. For Part B, not at all, just doesn't hold. And it'd be an interesting conversation. And we'd like to work with individual states to see kind of if it's holding within your, by the way, you can do this analysis by program within your state. Because we know there is variation in percent served even within state. But we don't know why it's not holding for Part B, but it hasn't for many years. So this again is a repeat pattern. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm not going to do the poll so I can turn it over to Siobhan. But I do want to make sure that everyone is aware that you have a, for each of the states, we generate a state child outcomes data quality profile. You should have received it about midsummer. If you don't know that you have it, please get in touch with me and we will make sure that you get another one. This is what it looks like on the cover. It has your state name here and it says either Part C or Part B up there. And within it, you will see different kinds of analyses that are presented to you, including just your data and then what your state looks like on the data quality issues that we just talked about. This is these are examples of the kinds of graphs you will see. It will show your state, it will show the national data, it will show your state with trends over time on your summary statement. And how you can, what we see here, for example, is that this state is a little higher than the national data. And that when they look at summary statement 2, outcome B, they are actually trending. One, there is a trend. They have definitely dropped. And 2, they are trending a little lower than, definitely trending lower than the national data, which is the midline. And they're actually hanging at or lower than 1 standard deviation below. So they are pretty substantially below. And that's why looking at these data can generate quite a bit of conversation within your state. So I do encourage you, if you have not seen your data quality profile, be sure you put your hands on it. If you want any help interpreting your data quality profile, you can either email me or email any of your state liaison at ECTA, because there's really a wealth of information in there. Real quickly, you can get the highlights, the data that we presented here. It's a 2-page summary and it's on the ECTA website. There is a guidance document this is for Part C, around computing the infants and toddlers who did not receive services for at least 6 months. Coming very soon, possibly this afternoon, to the DaSy website is a blog on looking at your child outcomes data profile, resources on year-to-year change and what they mean, and there are just many more resources that are available to you. So download the PDF when it's posted. These are live links. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Siobhan.
Great. Okay, thank you. So we will jump right in and keep this moving to talk about indicator 4. So today I'm just going to cover a brief overview to the indicator, and then the main topics we're going to cover in this section are a little bit about the state approaches, data quality, the performance data, and a few resources. So the state approaches are going to include things like the surveys used and the population surveyed, dissemination and return. When we talk about data quality, we're really looking mainly at response rates and representativeness of your data. And then we're going to look a little bit at the trends and a few key national resources and some upcoming TA opportunities. So before we jump into looking at data, I want to just remind everyone what data are included and the data sources. So these, like the child outcomes data, are for the fiscal year 2017. So states submitted these in February 2019. we have 50 states included along with DC and the territories and jurisdictions for a total of 56. All 56 states did submit data. However, there was one state whose data was determined that was not valid or reliable by OSEP. So they're not included in some of the quantitative data. We did still have the ability to code some of their approach data, so some of the qualitative data is still coded for that state, even though the quantitative data is not included. So, and just the data sources, the numbers we get exported from the online system grads, which many of you know, and provided to us by OSEP, and then the qualitative data that you're going to see a lot of are coded by staff here at DaSy and ECTA, where we read through and kind of glean what we can about the different approaches that states are using. Just one note is that not everybody reports the same level of detail, especially on those qualitative information, so you will see different numbers and some instances of missing approach data where if we're not really sure, sometimes we have subsets where we can see what's going on. So that's just a note that if you see some different ends, totals, that's why. So just a refresher on Part C, APR Indicator 4. For those who are new, or just as a reminder, this indicator is looking at the percent of families who report that early intervention has helped the family A, know their rights, B, effectively communicate their children's needs, and C, help their children develop and learn. So although we'll be drilling into some of the variation, this is the common measurement regardless of the survey used or specific scoring methodology used. Okay, so we're going to start with a national picture of the surveys used. So all states use a survey methodology to report on Indicator 4 for Part C. These are the 4 main groupings that we code for, listed from most frequent to least frequently used. The first is the Early Childhood Outcomes Center Family Outcomes Survey, revised, used by 20 states. The next one is the NICSEAM survey, and that stands for the National Center for Special Education and Monitoring. Another group of 17 states using that survey. The next grouping of state-developed surveys, although we kind of put those together, those are states that have developed their own unique survey, so that grouping is kind of a mixed bag as far as states that have developed their own unique survey. And then the last, the smallest group, a handful of states continuing to use the original Family Outcomes Survey at 7 states. And this year we just had one change over last year, which was one state that moved from the original FOS to the revised FOS. So the overall stable as far as the surveys that folks are using, we typically have 1 or 2 changes per year. And just a note that depending on the survey, some of the surveys use multiple questions for each of the indicators, and some of the surveys use just one question. The NICSEAM has a different type of scoring metric for meeting the criteria for the indicator, so it is a mix among these different survey approaches as far as the specifics of the wording of the questions and things like that. So next we just have, this is just a visual depiction of the variability of the surveys used. So you can see, look for your state and your neighbors, and you can see the variability across for the states and the outlying territories and jurisdictions. So next we're just going to kind of dive a little bit into the approaches used by looking at the family subgroups that are being surveyed across the country. About 41% of states that are including families with a minimum of 6 months in the program. So this is typically based on hypotheses around families being in the program a certain minimum amount of time in order to be assessing the degree of helpfulness of the program. So that's a common kind of family subgroup. Another big chunk of states are serving all families in the program at a given time. And then we do have 10 states that have sampling plans approved and on file with OSEP. So those include states that are doing like a stratified random sample, some states that do samples from districts or regions within their state, among other sampling approaches. Okay, so a little more about the approaches. The dissemination and return methods is often something people have questions about, approaches that other states are using to send out and get their surveys back from families. So for dissemination, this really just refers to the ways in which states are getting the surveys to the intended families. So we have 24 states that are using a mix. So that just means they're using more than one approach. Another 13 states that are doing some type of in-person handoff of the survey. That could be approaches like a service coordinator or a provider handing a paper survey to a family at a home visit or an IFSP meeting. So those are the types of in-person where there's a kind of in-person handoff of the survey. The mailed only dissemination, we have 10 states that went down by a couple this year, and a few more that we couldn't tell exactly the methods that were being used, or it was unclear. And then as far as coming back, you can see more states have multiple methods as far as giving families multiple ways to return. So again, if they named more than 2 or more approaches, then we would have coded them as having multiple methods. For example, they might be able to either mail the survey in or call a telephone line to complete it over the phone, or they might have an online version or handing it back to a staff. So any combination of multiple methods was the most common methodology we see for the return. And then the online option is something we have been tracking over quite a number of years, and going back a while, we didn't used to have a lot of online options, and each year we see this number go up a little bit, and this year was no different. We had 2 more states that noted that they had an online option, so that puts us just over half of the states reporting that they have some online option as one of the ways in which families can respond. When we look at the survey timing, this is also consistent with previous years. The states that did report the details about this, we have a majority administering the survey annually at a given point in time. The states in this group could include states that have a survey window that might be a month or even several months long. We would still consider that kind of a point in time, that they have an annual period or time point in which they administer the survey. And then another subgroup that is coordinating their surveys to families with some program participation. So some doing it at exit or at IFSP meetings, so that they're integrating that survey delivery into the existing families' participation in different time points in the program. And now we're going to jump a little bit into the data quality. We have mainly here talking about response rates and representativeness. So all states have reported a response rate for the last few years. This is now one of the fields in grad, so we have had a lot more complete data for this. There's quite a range, as you can see, from 7% to 100%, with the mean around 40% and the median around 33%. This is also comparable to the last the last few years. And then the next slide just shows the distribution. So in this visual, it's just another look at the same data, the survey response rates by sorted from smallest to largest. So each of those bars is one state. This slide kind of drills in a little bit into the variations in response rates based on the distribution and return methods. So just as a group, one of the things we are always trying to help states that are trying to improve return rates, both return rates overall and representativeness of data. So this is kind of a look around thinking about, do the ways in which we're handing surveys to families and talking about the surveys impact return rates. And so this is kind of a couple ways to slice this, looking at the in-person and multiple methods. If you look at the middle, the top chart, we do kind of see as a group that those two methodologies as a group have higher response rates than states who only do a mailed distribution. And we do know that's consistent with, survey methodology approaches in other fields, that often the mail only can be hard to really get those high return rates. And the returns, similarly, we were only able to do these couple, and even the mailed only is a real small set of substates. So, but you can see as a group, those are a little bit lower than when you're giving families multiple ways to return, tends to, overall, as a group, give you a higher return rate. So again, with the data quality, looking at representativeness really is just trying to capture the degree to which your survey data you feel adequately represent your families in your program. So just quickly, a few considerations. Nationally, we do see quite a bit of variation in how state programs assess their data, as well as the conclusions that they make. And we know that there are multiple ways in which you can assess how you're doing around representativeness. So including what variables you use, how many variables you look at, how do you assess differences among subgroups, and there's a couple ideas here. Some folks look at minimum response rates, so do all your groups have, a minimum bar? Others look at kind of the proportion of respondents comparing to their program demographics. And as far as making conclusions, also there's different approaches as far as looking at plus or minus a certain percentage, looking at statistical difference or meaningful differences, and just considering those smaller subgroups when you're doing so and making those conclusions. For many states, some of those smaller subgroups can be kind of problematic to compare well. So that's just kind of a consideration as we head into talking about representativeness, and we want to remind people that those kind of considerations are also true when you're digging into your state level data as well as the national picture. So this slide is really capturing, for those of you who have a role entering data into grads, there's a question that asks whether the demographics of your families that have responded are representative of the demographics of your enrollment in Part C. So this is a state, how the states answered. So we have about a little over 2/3 that said yes, they felt that their data did represent the demographics of their state, and another 30% that said that no, they did not feel their data represented the state. And then the one state was omitted that did not have valid data. So again, these are some variables that we code for and that are commonly reported in states' APRs as far as the variables that folks are looking at. Race and ethnicity, race and or ethnicity continues to be the top variable that many people are looking at, as well as variables like district or county or region or some other variable around kind of where families are located in your state, child gender, and then you see some other variables that some states use, but not a large number of states that look. And again, these are certainly things within your state that are really important to drill down to when you're digging into your own state level data. Okay, so performance data. So now we're going to get into some of the actual indicator performance data, and there's just a few more slides. Here again, refresher on our 3 sub-indicators, and you can see the national means for early intervention, helping the family know their rights, 90%, helping the family effectively communicate their child's needs, 91%, and helping their child develop and learn at 92%. Each of these are very similar to last year. We did actually see each of the numbers go down just a little bit, but they were all within like a half a percentage point or less. So it's barely perceptible on these trend charts, but overall we consider these data to be quite stable when we're looking at the state level data and the national data. The national averages are quite high, and often we do see the consistency within at the state level from year to year. But certainly, again, performance data, like response rates, we hopefully are seeing more and more states look into their performance data by those subgroups. So thinking about local programs, different family subgroups, are you seeing comparable results in your subgroups in your state? So that's something that hopefully many of you are continuing to look at. And one final data slide before I just have a couple resources. This is just a kind of one slice, so I just want to point out that when we kind of drill down a little bit from that national picture to looking at some variability within those surveys used, we do see a little bit of variability here. Although some of these groupings are, as I mentioned in the beginning, a little bit of a mixed group, so they're not. It's not a perfect grouping, but you can see that there is a little bit of variability related to the tool used, which makes sense because all surveys have their own metrics and specific measurement, but overall they are quite similar. And some of the, like the state developed surveys, again, is kind of a mix of surveys within that. And the NICSEAM group as well, it has a mix of cut points. And so there's a little bit of variability even within these groupings as well. So I see we have only a couple minutes left, and I know we had a little blip there, but I'm just going to quickly kind of point out a few resources before we close. These are some hyperlinks to some kind of landing web resources, the ECTA Family Outcomes landing page, a few resources around improving practices and improving family outcomes. So if you're seeing this as an area in which you would like to focus in your state, certainly looking into some of those recommended practices with families, family engagement, and other resources to improve your practices with families. The DaSy Center Toolkits kind of landing page has some nice resources here that can be used with the family outcomes data, like data visualization and other kind of data use toolkits. And then we also have some graphing and calculators that can be used with the family data. And lastly, just a few notes on technical assistance with family outcomes. We do have a family outcomes data community of practice. We just finished our series for 2019, and are currently planning for the 2020 series and kind of figuring out what that can look like. So we have a link you can sign up to get information about that, but we will also be letting all the states know via the listservs about when we have a little more information about that. The family data quality profiles for this year are coming soon too. We're on a little bit different schedule than the family ones, but they're very parallel to the profiles that Kathy showed around the child outcomes data. So be looking for those in December. Each state will be getting their profile. And then next year, we're hoping to have a small group of states that are interested in focusing in a more in-depth way on improving equity in family data and practices. So we're kind of in the early stages of planning that for next year. But again, information will be shared with all states about those opportunities as they come. And just lastly, we always are happy to work individually with states working on their family measurement, data quality practices around Indicator 4, and certainly are poised to help as new initiatives come our way as well. So here's Kathy and my contact information. Please email us with any follow-up questions, since we didn't really have time for discussion today, or individual technical assistance needs or requests. We can answer that or connect you to the appropriate people. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.